Hello everyone, welcome to yet another video where I try and avoid the elephant in the room of the Russia-Ukraine situation. Instead I'm going to look a bit more domestically, since there are some goings on in the higher ends of the police and the NHS, both of which are rather large institutions in the UK that seem to be very cringe. Though luckily there appears to be some good news when it comes to both. But I think we should start off with the bad news, and the bad news is that the NHS chief frets over white male middle class privilege. Chris Hopson, the chief executive of NHS providers, said that he has become lost for words as I grapple with new language, which is why I usually suggest to tell people under the age of 25 who say you're white to fuck off. Thankfully I waited past 30 seconds there so I can get away with an F-bomb. Though I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube still decides to demonetise this stream. An NHS leader has admitted he's felt at sea when confronting the issue of race equality because of his white male middle class privilege, but is now calling on others like himself to work harder on the subject. Yes, you need to self-flagellate all you whiteys in the NHS, otherwise you're not doing the Lord's work. Chris Hopson, the chief executive of the NHS providers, said internal discussions on how to make the health service an effective anti-race organisation had initially left him feeling defensive. NHS Providers is a membership organisation and trade association for NHS trusts. Now, the reason things like this are in the news now is because a few months ago there was a report published about racial inequality in the NHS. I didn't bother making a video on it because honestly it's pretty similar to every other video I've done on racial inequality reports in the past, in that it was all dodgy statistics and most of the issues come from inequality of outcomes, which I don't care about. But also there were reports of people's issues with being racially discriminated against or called racial slurs not being taken seriously and things like that, which I'm sure are things that happened, but in a lot of these cases they're either hyperbolically overblown or it turns out the person lies about them. But I will say, don't take my word on it, I never went into much detail on the report. I also want to make it clear that I'm not saying that no one in the NHS has ever suffered some sort of racial discrimination or been insulted based on their race. I am saying an NHS chief coming out and saying I have white privilege and that's bad is a monumentally stupid response. But that's exactly what's happening, so let's go into detail. In a blog written to launch a report on health service efforts to improve racial equality, Hopson said, "There were times when I have felt at sea. When I have felt every single one of my 58 years and every inch of my white, male, middle-class privilege." You don't really need to say middle-class privilege anymore. Basically, everyone in the UK is middle-class. Particularly in the face of younger colleagues who seem to reflexively engage with these issues much more effectively than I do. He added that he had at times become lost for words as I grapple with new concepts and new language, worrying that I'm going to say the wrong thing, and felt I'm going right the way back to the beginning of my career to learn from scratch. And he said he had also been forced to grapple with other really difficult questions, like how do I reconcile my responsibility for everyone in the organisation when there may be some members of staff uncomfortable with the concept of white privilege. So unsurprisingly, Hopson here realises that he is self-flagellating, and also realises that normal people don't like to self-flagellate, especially when they've done nothing wrong, such as happen to have been born white. And unsurprisingly even mentions it in the blog. He said he had been challenged multiple times while working on the subject, writing our dialogue told us that having an all-white director leadership team is a serious problem for our organisation, as it has, for example, potentially deterred some people from joining NHS providers. Yeah, potentially deterred, so you don't actually know. You're just speculating nonsense at this point, and I find it rather insulting. But aren't we meant to be appoint on the basis of merit alone, my inner monologue told me? Yes! It's very insulting if you don't, in fact, because you're basically saying to all the black people that you hire at that point, sorry, you wouldn't actually have been good enough if we did hire you on merit, but you're black, so we had to hire you. And then all the white people who aren't hired, but would have been hired on merit, yes, they're also insulted, because you have to say to them, sorry, you're really good and you're exactly what we're looking for, but you're white, so TTFN. I now recognise we haven't worked anywhere near hard enough to create a diverse pool of candidates from which to make director-level appointments. So I can already guess what they're going to do about that. They're going to do exactly what every other institution does, and only puts out job positions to people who aren't white. I don't know how that doesn't break the equality law, and I don't know why it's never been taken to court before, but it might be something to look into. The report, based on a survey of NHS trust leaders, found there were widespread ambitions to listen more closely to staff about their experiences. Only a fifth said they had made progress in actions to retain ethnic minority staff, and less than a third had made race equality part of their board assurance framework. Well, I'm not surprised the NHS are slow. The NHS are always slow. But I mean, really, the NHS is supposed to be there to heal people. It is there as a health service. It is not there as a racial equality service. Somehow, this blog gets even worse. In a statement issued alongside the report, Hobson said, "It is unacceptable that in aggregate, whole sections of our population suffer worse health outcomes as a result of their ethnicity." Which is a really weird thing to say, because certain groups of people, let's call them, I don't know, penis havers, tend to suffer worse health outcomes from prostate cancer than other demographics of gender. It's not surprising that some ethnicities suffer worse health outcomes than others. I wouldn't be surprised if white people suffer more from skin cancer than from darker ethnicities. And whole sections of our staff are unable to give of their best as a result of how they are treated due to their race. What a weird sentence. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's true either. It's really hard to say, because these reports are aggregates again, and you really need specifics. And it's really hard to tell if it's actually institutionally racist or if it's just one-off scenarios. But we don't know because the report wasn't looking for that. It is clear that white leaders like myself need to do significantly more to effect much greater change at a faster pace, by pulling up the ladder to other white people and giving it to black people on the basis of, checks notes, intersectionality. That's crossed out. Critical race theory. So this is what I would call a great example of bottom-up change. As this guy mentions, he was all for meritocracy, he was all for hiring people on the basis of whether they could do the job better than other candidates or not. But because of this report that came out that honestly just didn't seem that good or that reliable, plus a load of people coming to him telling him that basically they feel the same way as the report and that they think white privilege is real and that they say that he doesn't understand XYZ because he's white, male and privileged because of that, he is probably going to completely change the hiring process to go along with whatever critical race theory's arguments are this week. And let's not forget that the NHS is wasting money on diversity officers and even allowing complete racialist nonsense on their official blogs as long as it's in favour of black people. Yes, I've covered these in previous videos. Yes, it appears that the NHS is going to fall under its own weight, which ironically is being accelerated by the very people who support both CRT and the NHS. I hope they realise they are burning the world they love. Anyway, that's the bad news out of the way. Let's get on to some more based white pills. Don't waste your time on thought crime, police told. So Tom Winters told senior police that it is not illegal to think anything. Yes, it appears we do actually have some sensible people at the top rungs of police commissions. However, they appear not to be actually able to do that much. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all these issues with Harry the Owl, or Count Dankula, or any other famous case about free speech in the UK. Chief constables must remember they enforce, not create the law, the head of the police watchdog said as he hit out at the creeping influence of so-called thought crime. Not so-called thought crime, it's literally thought crime. Sir Tom Windsor, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, told senior police that it is not illegal to think anything, and that, well, technically it actually is, and that they must not declare something that is not a crime to be a crime. He warned that at the same time, officers were still failing to turn up to serious crime reports, such as domestic abuse. Yes, it's not hard to imagine that if policemen are just required to sit on their arses and trudge through Twitter and Facebook all day, finding people who say N-words, you can imagine why they don't bother going out to actually deal with people who might actually hurt them. I'm sorry, love, I know you got your skull beaten in by your husband, but you see, we had to go to this report that Twitter had because someone called someone else a nonce. But they didn't use that N-word. Some police forces are treating reports of misogyny and transphobia as hate crimes. Sue Fish, Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire before she retired in 2017, was the first to expand the definition of hate crime to include misogyny in 2014. in an effort to tackle sexist abuse in Nottinghamshire force, said that street harassment, including catcalling or wolf whistling, could be reported to the police and investigated. Unbelievable. Some builders whistle at a woman. Oh my god, they're going to have bad DBS checks after that. Windsor wrote in the Watchdog's annual State of Policing report, it is not appropriate for senior police officers serving or retired to assert a right of police to declare anything criminal, least of all what people may think. They have no legal power to create criminal offences in their police areas or anywhere else. It's important that no one is misled. The police enforce the law, they do not make it. He said that hating someone or something is not criminal. Again, not technically true, although it would be an aggravating factor in sentencing if such hatred resulted in a crime such as an assault. Which is true, and I completely disagree with. I don't see why murder is made any worse because a white person murdered a black person. Any murder is equally bad, unless in self-defence, of course. Or it was a complete accident, in which case it's manslaughter, and in which case all of those crimes are equally bad, no matter what races, sexes, etc. are involved. Windsor then manages to get into basic economics. Windsor said that police forces could not afford to turn up to every crime and would never be able to meet demand. However, he said they were still failing to turn up to some serious offences. They plead inadequate resources and the need to prioritise more serious crimes, but domestic abuse is a serious crime. And they're not turning up to them, because apparently it's equally as serious if someone calls someone else an N-word online. Windsor, who will be leaving this month after 10 years in the role, added, it is unjustifiable for any police force to decline to attend and properly investigate crimes of a serious nature such as burglary or domestic abuse. He warned the government's drive to recruit an extra 20,000 officers to replace posts cut during austerity could lead to unsuitable people with misogynistic and racist attitudes joining the force. Very sensible man, it seems. Yes, you are only limited by your supply of police officers. If they end up trying to look for non-crimes while real crimes are going on, then you're not going to have enough police officers to look at the real crimes. Oh, and look at London, the crime rate is skyrocketing. Luckily, Cressida Dick is finally out of there, so hopefully they actually hire someone who has some sort of merit and good experience in the police. But it's London, so it probably won't happen. But I do sincerely hope and can actually see more people higher up in the police being like Sir Tom Windsor here, and basically saying, look, you're the police, you're supposed to enforce the law, not make it up as you go along. And maybe even it will get some MPs to think about making some changes to the Equality Act and the Malicious Communications Act, because it seems to waste a lot of police time. If you go with the narrative it's letting men get away with violence against women, you'd probably get somewhere, because most MPs are stupid. Anyway, lucky for you, my dear viewer, I have one more white pill for you, so let's all get cheering. Tavistock Gender Clinic Not Safe for Children report finds England's only specialist service for young people who identify as transgender is criticised in an NHS report. Literally, a service for young people who might or might not have gender dysphoria is literally not safe for them. This is something I've been harking on about since H. Bomber Guy did that massive charity drive for mermaids to get back at Graham Linehan. It's amazing how much danger leftist activists put people they say they care about in, just to get back at people they don't like. I wouldn't be surprised if all the money that Vorsh made recently for the Ukraine effort ends up going all the way to Nazis first. I mean, he did it before with Hamas, so why wouldn't he do it again? Anyway, on to the topic at hand. Tavistock Clinic faces a complete overhaul after a review found that its gender identity services are not safe or viable long-term option for children and young people. The report has been hailed as a victory for whistleblowers who warned that the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, clinic in North London was operating outside of typical NHS safeguarding and clinical standards, which again is something I've been pushing about for the past 3 years. God, it feels good to be on Team Right yet again. All those people in my comments over the years that are saying I hate trans people, well, turns out I was right. Turns out my worry for the children was in the right place. And hopefully the overhaul of the service will instead help these kids rather than potentially ruin their lives. Dr. Hilary Cass, a retired paediatrician, was commissioned by NHS England to investigate services at the clinic, which has been sending children as young as 10 for experimental hormone treatment. I mean, that's obvious. Yeah, no dirt outside of NHS safeguards if it's experimenting on kids. And not only that, they were sending kids as young as 4 to this place, not for hormone replacement, but just sending kids as young as 4 to a Tavistock centre about gender before... Look, a 4-year-old doesn't know what gender even is. Of course they're going to be confused. The clinic, run by the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, is England's only specialist service for children and young people who identify as transgender. It has been overwhelmed by a sudden increase in referrals from across the country, particularly among young girls who are distressed about their gender and youngsters on the autism spectrum. Yes, it does appear that trying to break down what makes a gender does affect young girls more than young boys, because young girls are more agreeable than young boys, and because of that, the young girls will basically do what they're told, and if they are told they are a boy, they will probably go along with it. Same goes for autistic kids. They're told if they don't literally autistically fit in a particular gender, they are no longer that gender. Hence they get referred to these places. In 2009, the clinic received about 50 referrals, typically from males who had suffered gender dysphoria from an early age. By 2020, there were 2,500 referrals, mostly from females who started suffering gender identity issues in their early teens, with a further 4,600 young people on the waiting list. Woof! About 1/3 of children and young people referred to GIDS have autism or other types of neurodiversity. I don't know why that word always makes me laugh. While there is also an overrepresentation of looked after children in local authority homes or foster care. Basically, kids with issues are sent there. Yeah, I'm not surprised. You don't send normal kids to get checked up on. It has also lost many senior staff who have clashed with the leadership over the best way to treat vulnerable young people with complex histories who are requesting experimental hormone therapies to change gender. The long-term outcomes of such therapies in this age group are still unknown. So I don't know why the NHS would risk it. And honestly, I think the leadership that have been trying to push that should be charged under the law. I don't know specific laws, obviously, but this has got to be under some sort of human experimentation law. At the very least, they should be fired at this point because they've harboured an entire clinic that is unsafe for kids. And I think if you harbour any sort of environment that's unsafe for kids, you need to be put in jail, or at the very least, never be allowed near kids again. Critics have accused the clinic of abandoning NHS best practices in its alleged readiness to offer life-changing medical treatments to children who declare themselves transgender. The cast concluded that a fundamentally different service model is needed in an interim report released yesterday. Her report called for an end of the clinic's current monopoly over treatment of young people wishing to change gender. She recommended that treatment be redistributed to regional hubs across the country to reduce the burden on the North London clinic and to ensure that young people in crisis are seen more quickly by a broader range of health professionals. Yeah, that's probably a good way to do it. Generally these things were kept under wraps because yes, there was only one clinic who appeared to be playing by their own rulebook, and it took a few whistleblowers for that to be investigated at the very least. So if you distribute it around, there'll be less kids who are all put into this monopoly of an unsafe haven for kids. Instead, they will go to different gender clinics, see different people, and hopefully be cared for a lot better than if they just went to Tavistock. Cass says that the GIDS's lack of consistent data collection meant that not enough is known about the service users or their outcomes to justify the current approach to treatment. She also found that the treatment of young people identifying as transgender had somehow escaped the normal quality controls. Because the specialist service has evolved rapidly and organically in response to demand, the clinic approach and overall service design has not been subjected to some of the normal quality controls that are typically applied when new or innovative treatments are introduced, the review said. The leadership of Tavistock really need to be facing jail time for this. The report concluded a fundamentally different service model is needed which is more in line with other paediatric provisions to provide timely and appropriate care for children and young people needing support around their gender identity. This must include support for any other clinical presentations that they may have. It is essential that these children and young people can access the same level of psychological and social support as any other child or young person in distress, from their first encounter with the NHS and every level within the service. Cass prefaced her report with a letter to young people. She said, "I have heard that young service users are particularly worried that I will suggest services will be reduced or stopped. I want to assure you that this is absolutely not the case. The reverse is true. I think that more services are needed for you closer to where you live." And yeah, these seem to be covering the issues I've had from day one. Experimental treatment needs to go. Don't even think about giving kids hormones, at the very least till we know what they do to people under the age of, well, 16, I think. A few people say I'd personally prefer it at 18, but hey, I'm not a paediatrician. And the rest of the article is ex-nurses and staff from the Tavistock Centre basically saying, oh, this is really good that we're finally looking into this, it was horrible. And there's also a trans regret story, but I don't really want to get into that because I think this video is long enough. Basically, there's some white pills for you. It seems Tavistock is actually going to have to change and be a bit more distributed around the UK rather than getting every young person that thinks they're trans to North London and being encouraged to go on experimental treatment, which is not liable to say because the report says it's experimental treatment. So hopefully that means kids who are confused about their gender will actually get the help they need, and we'll see basically no trans regret stories ever again. As for the rest of the NHS, well, they're probably not going to hire any white people ever again. And when it comes to the police, I hope they stop making laws, and I hope the laws that are terrible go sometime soon. We're in the clown decade, so things, I'm afraid, are only going to get worse before they get better. As for now, that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.